Why do we come to church Sunday after Sunday? Do we do it because it is merely our muscle memory? Do we come here because we have been doing it so long that we just get in the car and it arrives almost as if it has driven itself? Do we do this because that is just what Christians do? They go to church on Sunday. Do we come expecting anything out of the ordinary to happen? What is it that we come here on Sundays for? Look at the Pharisee in the parable today. Why do you think he is there? God, I thank thee that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. He is there to feel better about himself. This seems to be his sole purpose. He addresses his prayer to God, but other than that, he could be saying this same prayer in the mirror. At least he would then be encountering the God he is trying to worship. His prayer is better suited for the mirror because if we ignore the address to God, what is he in the temple to do? Nothing. Nothing that he couldn't do outside the temple. In fact, he seems pretty confused. He has the wrong audience for his address. He should be standing outside of the temple because that is the audience he is seeking. He is seeking to be praised by all the people he is putting down in his prayer. So by being in the temple with this prayer, he is actually in a place where he should not be. He should not be there because the approval he seeks is not the God of that temple. No, he has brought his own God in, and he is practicing idol worship in the midst of the temple of the God of Israel. He has not just set up his own abomination of desolation in the temple where it ought not to be. Jesus' advice when this happens is, then let all who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And what happens on mountains but an encounter with God? Mount Moriah, God comes and makes a covenant with Abraham after he proves his willingness to sacrifice his own son. Mount Sinai, God comes to Israel and establishes a covenant, making him their God and them his people. Mount Calvary, God comes and makes a sacrifice of himself to establish a covenant with us for the forgiveness of sin and the adoption into the family of God. Flee to the mountains where God establishes his covenants and abide in them. And this is as opposed to the Pharisee, who is there only to worship himself. We have the tax collector, who is also in the temple for a reason, to encounter God. He too has seen the abomination of desolation set up where it ought not to be, and he too has fled to the mountain, the Temple Mount. He comes recognizing God, and he comes to encounter him. And when one encounters God, one is immediately made aware, not of our worthiness, but of our unworthiness to be in his presence. When all the lights are turned on in a room, it becomes apparent how dirty the room actually is. When the tax collector is confronted with his sin, he does what he is supposed to do in the presence of sin. He flees to the mountains and throws himself on the mercy of the court, and he confesses his sins. I tell you, Jesus says, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other one. One man came to the temple to place himself as the object of worship there. The other came to encounter God. So why are you here today? Is it because this is what you have been trained to do? Well, good. But remember, when you come, we come to encounter God. If we come simply because it makes us feel better about ourselves, then we too are setting up ourselves as idols in his temple. But if we find ourselves doing this, it happens on every now and then when we come in a place of dryness, we come just because we feel the obligation to come or whatever that is. It happens. But when it does happen, we need only to take the advice of Jesus and flee to the mountain of the new covenant, the mountain where he waits even now, signified by the light at the side of the altar. He waits to encounter us as we flee the abomination of desolation of our own idols and come to the holy hill of his sacrifice, where he establishes a covenant with us anew in the sacrifice of the altar, the bread of life that allows us to go down from that mountain to our own house, justified. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.